Thank you.
Hello everyone. I'm painfully aware I'm standing between you and your journey home right now. So I make this as short and sweet as possible. I've got reinforcements. Steve Mackey from Arkivum is one of our partners is with me. I've got some bit of interaction plan for you. If you just like to pass those around, each one of you has one. So there's going to be some questions. We want to gauge the mood of the audience, so hence your little card. Also, while you pass those around, our colleagues at Arkivum had those lying around. If you haven't completed them yet, do so, because there will be more.
I'll put it at the front.
Last minute questions. Okay. Is that the right one? This one. Oh. So, question time. And it's not going to be a political discussion, just some very simple questions for you. Have we reached the back? Almost? We're almost there? Yeah? Very good, very good, very good. Well done. There's a bit of a classroom scenario, a lot of people at the back, not many people in the front. I don't know where they come from. So we heard a lot about funder guidelines, RCUK, EPSRC, FAQs. One thing I wanted to know, do you feel ready to meet those various guidelines as of right now? Red, no. Green, yes.
Well, lots of red tomatoes.
Yeah, red tomato, yeah. Interesting.
Does anybody remember Ready, Steady, Cook, by the way?
We should have had some pen or something in between if you flick it quickly.
Green better there.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you for that. Do you currently have systems in place to meet those funding guidelines? Okay, a bit more green. Okay, thank you very much. And then last but not least, for those of you who had no systems, do you plan to get some? Are you looking at some? Are you planning to do things? Green, no? Okay, great. So we asked some similar questions a couple of months ago in February this year. So we ran a webinar relating to the EPSRC guidelines, and together with Arkivum, we run a little webinar. We have some friends at the DCC who helped us with looking at what those guidelines mean. Just by a show of hands or cards again, I've read most of those guidelines. The thing I find quite amazing is those are guidelines, almost checklists of things you have to do, but I can never find a checklist of things. It's always long documents, and I find it quite interesting. I don't know if anybody else has the same view. I don't know. I would have thought if there's guidelines, you get a checklist and you go yes, no. But there's lots of text and you have to work out what they mean, and it might be something else. And there's interpretation. So, or maybe that's a German in me. I like to go through a list and just get things done. So we ran a webinar and we kind of asked. We had about 100 attendees, and we asked them, how ready do you feel meeting, especially in this case, the EPSRC guidelines? And we kind of see a nice bell curve. So there's some people who kind of really are not prepared. Some others kind of getting there, others well prepared. And then some others quite ahead, feeling very well prepared, ready for it. And we also asked them, kind of going through, especially the EPSRC guidelines, we asked them, what expectations are your biggest struggle? And interestingly enough, it's funding of resources to meet those requirements. And those resources are largely IT spend. How do you calculate how much you need and what does it translate to? But also internal awareness. And I think sort of from the talks I've heard today, and you were talking about this earlier today as well, I think that kind of matches up quite nicely. And I find it quite an interesting trend, if you want to call it that. I mean, we had 90 people. Statistically, I know that's probably not a representative sample, but we go with what we have. And, you know, there's a few other things, policies, how you like access. So, but I think the funding and internal awareness is an interesting angle. Sorry, to leave that there. And kind of we're here to talk about the funding, how much it could cost you potentially, and what it means to you. And to do that, following previous speaker, I need to give you a bit of background about where I'm from and who we are. So University of London Computer Centre, as the name implies, we're part of University of London. Computer Centre kind of gives you an idea of which area we came from. So it was 1968 Flowers Report. If you look at sort of the key message that came out of that, some people pointed out, that sounds a bit like a shared service. Yes, it was and it is, and I know we're talking about this again in recent years, so it's a kind of a nice circle we're going around to. So we were set up one of the first supercomputing centers. So for those of you who don't know, if I'm not mistaken, that's a grey one. Comes with brown leather seating as part of the package. I looked it up a while ago. I think it has about as much computing power as the first iPhone had, or actually less than that. So just to show you how far we've come since then. So just to run you through, I know some people have heard of us, others haven't, which obviously makes me very sad because I'm the marketing manager and I want everybody to know about us. So we were funded in the 60s, became a national computing center. We built our own data center in early 2000s. We started offering open source software, mostly Moodle, later on ePrints. And that's how we kind of started looking at collections, repositories. So we started working with the Linnaean Society, the biologists amongst you should have heard the name Linnaean. Show of hands. Yeah, one. Can you tell us? No, I'm joking. Well, basically Linnaean was a Scandinavian, Swedish, Norwegian, Swedish biologist. He came up with the Latin names for plants and insects that are quite common these days. So they had a big collection, they digitized it, wanted to put it online for people globally to be able to access it. So we used ePrints, developed it a bit, developed plugins, and now they have probably about 500,000 visitors a month looking at those specimens, doing research, which means they don't have to get them out of the archive and for people to look at. So anyway, I'm not going to read through this. Most important thing, 2014, we got together with Arkivum based on some customer requirements. Together with University of East London, who looked at research data management. We need a repository to put our stuff in, and we need archive storage that's safe, secure, and meets requirements. So that's where the journey really took off. And funding guidelines. Obviously, this is a very high-level view, and it's my view of the world. But reading through those, I think the key things are impact, discoverability, open access, long-term preservation and access. I know there's granular sort of deep dives into that, and there's sort of subsets, but sort of if you distill it down, I think those are the key things funders want you to look at and expect from you. And I wonder, does your Dernke system or setup meet those requirements? Do you think? Show of tomatoes? Red. A sea of red. Okay.
Mainly tomatoes.
Okay, interesting. So I want to tell you a bit about the solution we developed, and I'm going to be very frank with you, no pun intended, see my name is Frank. This was a sort of cottage approach. It kind of happened over time, and sort of towards 2014, end of last year, we had the feeling that there's something to be done. We developed some proper SLAs for the service and just now have something that we think works. There's still room for improvement, and we like to get feedback from existing customers. We have about 35 at the moment, and hopefully new customers to make it even more useful and help you meet funding requirements. So one part of our solution is the repository. We use ePrints for that, as I mentioned before. So we work quite closely with Southampton. We take their core ePrints, turn it into what we call ULCC core, which means there's a set of plugins that we use for publications and research data management repositories. And then we basically spin it up for the various customers, and they use it in very different ways. So there could be research data management repository, publications, thesis. Some people put journals in there, which they shouldn't really, but they can. The benefit of ePrints is open source, so it's quite flexible. So you can more or less make it do whatever you want it to do, as long as you know what you want to do, if that makes sense. So just a bit of a more detail on what I meant with, we have sort of two sets of plugins. publications, which kind of manages the whole open access compliance. There's a couple of plugins there. Some of them we developed, co-developed, growth development, and the same goes for RDM. So it's kind of the unique identifiers, making sure you know where your data is and how you access it. But why Arkivum? So I'm going to hand over to Steve.
Thanks, Frank.
There you go.
Green, yeah. So I'm going to talk about archiving and digital preservation. And I'll start with hopefully what is a very uncontroversial statement, which is to say that backup isn't archiving. Hopefully nobody's going to argue with me. What we do, and what is a essential core of a research data management system post-publishing, is archiving and long-term preservation of the data set. What does that mean? So what it means from our perspective is it's data which isn't going to change. We're taking data sets which are immutable, which actually we want to guarantee haven't changed from the moment we've received them. In every case, if you put something into an archive, the data that's in the archive is the copy of the data. It's not a copy of the data. So we're not taking copies from primary data and storing them for protection. We're actually taking the copy of the data and it becomes the reference for that data. It's the one that matters and the one you refer back to. It's not for recovery. It's not to draw back to replace something because it's been lost or damaged. It's for discovery. And I think we're all still tackling that whole issue of we've got data and we're trying to store it and retain it, but actually making it discoverable and accessible to people is one of the major challenges we have. It's protecting value. There's two reasons why people really archive things. One is for compliance, so it's a protection against some kind of punishment for losing it, or for protecting people so they can go back and audit it and find out what happened in the past. Or it's a valuable asset and you want to preserve it for the future. So the two use cases that we get into, it's either people storing things because they want proof of something, but the more exciting stuff is that we're preserving assets which have got a real value in the future. So for example, we're currently engaged in a project of storing content for the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and it's actually digitization of Andy Warhol's 16mm film stock. And that is a project which has no endpoint. You know, we're preserving artworks forever. It's not, we need to keep these for a few years, and then after 7 years, the governing body will allow us to destroy them. It's preservation forever. And ensuring long-term accessibility. Again, these artworks are a big reason for you want to protect them and preserve them, but the reason you're doing that is you want to make them accessible to people to see in the future. So coming out of storage comes, how do we make these accessible, searchable, locatable for people? And here's the last one, which is very important in terms of research data management, is that if you have a piece of data and it's been used to support a piece of research, if you want to go back and check that data, question the results, or reuse that data in another piece of research, you have to be able to guarantee the integrity, the authenticity, the provenance of the data. It's no use if you've stored a data set for, say, 10 years, and when you go to relocate it and reuse it, that somebody says to you, well, I can't actually guarantee that that's the same data we put into the store 10 years ago. That becomes a completely valueless piece of research data. So we get into an archive, an active archive management. And I was thinking of this a few minutes ago. It's quite interesting. If we come from a situation only decades ago where our primary method of archiving, the whole word archiving, which I'm starting to hate, was centered around paper. You write up a report, you take your research data, you put it on paper, and at some point somebody says, well, we ought to archive this. So you take your piece of paper, you put it in a box, and somebody sticks it in a warehouse. Now, paper actually is extremely durable. You can set fire to it. It does degrade over a period of time, but interestingly enough, it will degrade in a non-uniform manner, and usually you can pick out most of the information from it, regardless of the fact it's degraded or not. It's not as good as some of the preceding storage methods, like tablets of stone were really good. But paper actually is pretty good. It'll last for hundreds of years. You compare that with digital storage methodologies, which are completely different. They are actually not durable for, reliably for almost any time at all. You know, the chances of corruption of data bits being flipped within a data set are finite, and of course that probability increases the longer we try to store data. And then you get the problems of that actually you're not able to store it on one piece of media, i.e. one piece of paper, for very long. So any archiving strategy has no relation to what we used to do with the paper at all. Putting something, archiving kind of implies that you take something, put it in a box and just forget it. You can't do that with digital information. You actually have to actively manage the data over time for it to retain that authenticity and integrity. It's a completely different process, but we give it the same word. We'll have to think of a new one for it. So here's a kind of graphic which shows active archive management of a digital archive means that you have to, first of all, when you receive content, you have to check it to make sure what you received is what somebody's given you. You then have to, over a period of time, first of all, you have to take several copies, because if one copy goes bad, you have no reference and nothing to refer back to. But remember, over time, there is a finite chance that every piece of data could become corrupt, lose its integrity. So you have to have several copies, and you have to actively keep on checking them to make sure, is this the same as the one you gave me? No, it isn't, and you have to go to repair it. So any long-term archive would be involved in this ongoing process of reading, checking, and repairing. It's a very active, not inactive process. And that's what we do. We provide a service whereby we actually take data, we replicate it, and we actively check it over a period of time and guarantee that the data you gave us, year 1 or year 0, and then we deliver back in year 10 or year 25, the two are identical, guaranteed, bit for bit. Not approximately, but identical. And that's one of the big differences. You look at the specs for online storage services, which readily available. Other storage services are available. You look at, I looked at Amazon, I think it's something like 1 in 10 to the minus 11 is their probability of a corrupted object. 99, I think it's about 99%. That's great, it's a really good figure. It's not 100%. And so the difference between 100% service and any other service is absolute guarantee, integrity of the data, provenance, authenticity. So to do that, we keep 3 copies. We keep them in UK data centres. Other important thing, it's not held with a US supplier, and hence can be appropriated by the US government. It's all encrypted. It's all held in ISO 27001 facilities and processes. And we keep a copy offline in escrow, which means that our customers can get their data back at any time without recourse to us. So I mentioned about some of the things that can happen to the data, and let's talk about the other things that we have to consider in terms of the processes involved in putting together a digital archive for more than a small number of years. And some of these, you start thinking through them, they're obvious, but when you start planning, it doesn't come to mind. Day to day, you have to grow your archive. You add media, you add disks, you add tapes to it. Monthly basis, on a continual basis, you want to check the integrity of the data and maintain the efficiency and reliability of the infrastructure. We talked about scrubbing. On an at least annual basis, you want to recover the data you've got in the archive and check its integrity and repair it if that has actually been affected. And here's the one of the important ones. We're talking about, with EPSRC, a 10-year retention from the last access of research data. That could be forever, or it could be a minimum of 10 years. Most hardware or IT technologies have got something like a 3 to 5 obsolescence cycle today. So even with a 10-year retention minimum for EPSRC, we're talking about 3 technology cycles for your data. So that's quite sobering. So we've got hardware, software, and hardware, and refreshes and migrations, which we would take care for you, or you've got to do yourself. Then talk about format migrations. So we're keeping our data primarily on tape, on LTO tape, and we're migrating that LTO tape, although it has a specification that says that it'll be a media life of 30 years. The reality, unfortunately, is the iterations tend to last about 7.5 years between introduction and the removal of support for that particular technology, which is important. So again, if you've got your data on tape, you're going to have to migrate it at least every 7.5 years. You've got support and staff migration issues, as we all have. So it may well be you put a system in today, then the guy who helped you install it or wrote the code may leave in 3 years' time, and you've got a real issue. And the last one is kind of interesting in change of suppliers. There's an interesting level of consolidation and churn within the whole of the IT industry. If you start thinking about even 10-year, not even 100-year, but 10-year cycles, and think about how many of the technologies or the suppliers are still around today that we were using 10 years ago. So even in terms of the EPSRC 10 years minimum, if we have a request for a piece of research information in 10 years' time, it is extremely unlikely that when it's served back, it will be coming off the media through the same systems that we put in place today. So all that's got to be planned for and all's got to be allowed for. So, after painting a very black picture about how difficult it is, the question as to, for those that have an RDN system in place, do you meet or have you planned for all of those issues? But Gary says yes. Yeah. Terrific. So, a summary. So, it can be done. So if you work with partners like ULCC and Arkivum, we can provide you with that infrastructure and take all that headache away from you. This whole archiving issue is not just backup. It's not tiered storage. It's not moving data from expensive primary storage to lower cost storage. It's actually way more complex, and it requires an awful lot of thought and planning. It's active, so we're actually not putting data into a big box and putting it into a warehouse and forgetting it. We're working that data all the time and will be for all the time it's with us. And of course the idea is that all that goes on under the surface, but in fact it's completely transparent to your users, to you. It's a managed service, we take care of it. So what you see is a repository, it contains the research data, it is openly accessible, and it has maximum integrity, so people can rely on the fact when they take the data and distribute it, that it is the same as it was when it went into the repository. As you can see here with the integration we've done with ULCC and ePrints, the system integrates seamlessly with institutional repositories like ePrints to provide that transparent user access.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve. Okay, so I mentioned earlier we've got about 35 customers at the moment that use the service to varying degrees. And not surprisingly, we get some frequently asked questions, and I thought I'd quickly run through those for you. So one of them is, how will your solution meet requirements to be 100% compliant with hefty open access policy? So one of the things we developed together with JISC is a so-called Reox plugin. What that basically does is check all your metadata and submissions for what's required by hefty policy and flex it up to you and tells you those data sets aren't compliant, those are the fields and types of data, metadata you need to add. And I think, and Rory, who's our lead technical developer in the back, can correct me if I say something wrong, but I think it kind of gives you a view of what percentage of your repository is compliant. Is that correct? Yeah, I get a thumbs up. Good. Just checking I'm not kind of over-promising you anything. The other thing we're getting, obviously we're providing a service to other institutions, so we are a service provider. So one of the questions we get asked is how we handle support requests and deal with support queries. So we're using a system called ServiceNow. It's kind of based around ITIL compliance. And you can call, email, or use the portal to log support issues or raise change requests, and we kind of make sure everything is kind of looked after and accounted for, and no one does anything to your system who doesn't have the authority to request a change, basically. Here's a bit of a screenshot, so nothing too exciting. Basically just an online portal, and you can report incidents and requests. One of the requests we get is about import or add certain journal articles or output, custom papers, etc. And again, I've got a couple of screenshots here. I don't know if we have that works. I don't know if you can see that here. Podcast, I would say, is probably not the usual research data output. So you can customize types, set them up. So this is an example of LSHTM. So they do podcasts. We actually developed a plugin with them to integrate with SoundCloud, so they can put stuff into SoundCloud and pull it into the repository. And then here we have an example from Reading, who I think have bespoke categories as well. Another thing we've asked is kind of data sources and authority feeds. So how can we kind of import certain data that's specific to an institution or kind of uses LDAP, etc. And again, here's an example of Brighton. They are using TransAcademic coding system for their papers, and that's something they want to do, and they can use that. And they can obviously have other areas as well. So it's kind of, again, because it's open source, you can make it as simple, complicated, complex as you want it to be. So it's kind of your call. Another important question, how does it work with existing CRISP systems and solutions? And again, I believe we have integrations to at least all of the common ones, at least once in the customer base. Checking with Rory again. Yeah, green tomato, good. So here's an example where we pull in some data from Symplectic into an ePrints record and vice versa. Just some quick examples to kind of show you what some customers have gone for. So we've got Goldsmiths, which are part of the University of London, like we are. They have 3 ePrints repositories, publications, archives, data, currently using ePrints for journals, but we are moving them to an open journal system because that's more appropriate. We've got UL, which kind of kicked off the whole research data management solution we kind of developed over the past 12 to 18 months. So they use publications, research data, and Arkivum. And we're actually the driving force behind us kind of developing a plugin that kind of integrates with ePrints and Arkivum. And then publications, so St. Mary's, they just come very simple, out of the box. They just have publications, nothing else. And that's fine. We can cater for most of those scenarios. So, after we've bombarded you with information, question. Would you consider a fully managed RDM service? Yes, no? Okay. That's a good mix. Green, green, yeah. Okay. That's what I like to hear. Obviously now the question is, how much is all this shenanigans? And I've heard some very big numbers flying around, and just to have a disclaimer, as you usually do have with marketing and sales materials, what we are talking about is just the pure IT infrastructure and the service around that. So if I give you an option to now vote on a price, that doesn't include your staff costs, anything else that obviously kind of you pay for yourself. But do you think what we offer, what we just talked about, is more or less than £10,000 per year? And the disclaimer, obviously, at the bottom, very small, so I read it for you. Doesn't include audits, migration, additional development. So, voting. Less, more. 50-50. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so we're just below that. I think it's 9,729 at the moment, so that's kind of very vanilla, out of the box, getting you started. Obviously goes up as you add more repositories to the service, as you require more development, more integration, etc. So just to give you an idea, I think our largest paying customer at the moment is about 25 to 30K, but they have loads of development, loads of integrations. And this is an annual recurring fee, so kind of, I would say 10, 15K kind of gets you started and then see where it goes. Just to finish off, we have a webinar coming up on the 20th of October, so save the date, fill in little business cards and put them in our stand so we can get in touch with you, where we're going to do a bit of a run-through the system. We've kind of been asked to go into a bit more detail by some customers or potential customers. So rather than traveling the country and doing it over and over again, I think a webinar is a good way to do it for as many people as possible at the same time. So if you're interested, do leave your details. And now it's time for prize, I think.
Any questions?
Oh yeah, question. Yeah. Questions, prize.